Welcome back to the Cone Zone, everyone. It's been a few weeks since we've done one of these, but today is a very special day. My dad has published his memoir today. It's available on Amazon. You should buy it. It's called Gloves Off, 40 Years of Unfiltered Sports Writing. Dad, show everyone what it looks like.
Okay, you ready? This is what you call shameless promotion. Can you see it?
Beautiful. Love it. With forwards from Steve Young, Brian Murphy, and an afterword by Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah. Okay.
This is a big day.
We did the promotion part, right?
We did the promotion part.
Okay.
So 49ers fans, this book has about 64 vignettes or little essays about lots of different sports figures from the Bay Area and not from the Bay Area. Lots of 49ers figures, including Bill Wall, Steve Young, Joe Montana, those kind of guys. So I figured today I would ask my dad to give you a preview of what some of those vignettes are and just have him talk about the certain 49ers personalities, starting with Steve Young.
Okay.
Dad, what is Steve Young really like?
Okay. Let me ask you a question because, I'm a moron at this. I can see your face. Can you see my face full screen?
Yes, and what a face it is.
What a face. Okay. First of all, Steve Young is one of my favorite all-time people I ever covered. I mean, when you say like you have warmth in your heart for that person, also for Dusty Baker, I mean, he's the absolute greatest. But when Iggy, I'm going to call Grant Iggy, when Iggy was 10, he was so innocent and he said, "Dad, could I meet Steve Young?"
I was seven.
You were really seven?
I was seven. This was first grade. They had just won the Super Bowl, and it was 1995, the season after the Super Bowl.
Okay, 7. Ordinarily, I didn't like to make sports figures heroes, but it was my son. So I went to Steve, and Steve is such a mensch. He's such a nice guy. I said, my son, Iggy, would like to meet you. He said, bring him down, whatever, And so we went down, and we went into the famous lobby, sitting in a chair. Now you pick up the narrative.
Okay, so we're sitting in the lobby, and I'm sitting there with a hat that you had given me and a Sports Illustrated for Kids trading card of Steve Young. And I wanted him to give me autographs. I mean, I was a regular kid, but my dad's a sports columnist, and you were prepping me for an interview. You got to ask some questions. What are you going to ask Steve Young when he sits down? So he came by, and Steve said, "Lowell, I want you to be very quiet. This is between Grant and I." Isn't that what he said?
He said, between Iggy and me.
This is between Iggy and me. So
and you were sitting on my lap.
I was sitting on your lap, and I asked Steve, how difficult is it to throw a spiral? Isn't that what I asked him?
Yes, you did.
And he said, it's harder than you think. Sometimes I'll throw an interception, but the spiral was so good, I'll admire the pass anyway. Didn't he say that?
He said something else. Before he said that, he said, look at my left hand.
That's true. He showed it. He said, it's not that big.
That happened.
He said,
right?
Look at my left hand. Of course, it looked huge to me because I was 7, but he said, it's really not that big. And one of the things I always admired about Joe Montana was just how humongous his hands were, because it made throwing a spiral so easy for Joe.
Okay, so now we did the whole thing, and we're driving back in the car.
Wait, there was more.
Okay, you want to tell more?
It was a 15-minute one-on-one interview, probably the best one Steve Young's ever had. And then he said, would you like to meet? Like he gives me the autographs, and he said, well, would you like Jerry Rice to sign your hat? So I said, yeah, absolutely. Jerry Rice is the greatest. So he runs all around the facility and can't find him. He's looking for him. He must have looked for 15 minutes.
We were alone there, yeah.
As Steve is looking, Brent Jones comes out. He says, what's going on? And we say, well, we're waiting for Steve to get Jerry to sign Grant's hat. And Brent goes, I can't sign it?
That's what he said, yeah.
I'm no good? So I got Steve Young, Jerry Rice, and Brent Jones autographed that day.
Yeah, he got Steve ran down Jerry Rice. He was sitting alone in a classroom at the facility eating lunch alone, which in a way tells you a lot about Jerry. We'll come back to Jerry in a minute. Say what happened on the drive back to Oakland.
Okay, Dad, tilt your screen down just a little bit. I want to see the full facha. There you go.
How's that?
A little up.
A little up.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. Just want to get the full
we're
facha.
very informal
Perfect.
here.
There you go. Okay, so on the drive home, I was so happy, and you were happy because you had just come through for me.
Yeah.
And so just to let you know how pleased I was and how you had made my entire life, I said to you, Dad, I wish Steve Young was my dad.
That's what you said.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is what I get.
Yeah.
This is what I get. He said, Dad, I just want to say one thing. And I said, yes, sweetheart. What? He goes, I wish Steve Young was my dad. I thought, oh boy. Do you
It's
still?
funny. I had a dream like 2 nights ago that I ran into Steve Young in public, and he remembered that day, and it meant everything to me. I knew you when you were 7.
Yeah, I doubt it.
I doubt it. And I remember the way he signed his autograph for me on the Sports Illustrated for Kid trading card, it said, "To Iggy, my main man, Steve." And I have a feeling he signed that for a lot of kids in the mid-90s.
He had a lot of main men.
A lot of main men. Anyway, it was nice to be one of his main men.
Sure, absolutely. Is it okay that I'm your father now and not him?
Yeah, I accepted it. I learned to live with it.
Okay, Jerry Rice.
Let's talk about Jerry.
Let me tell you what I thought about him. First of all, Jerry Rice there are no superlatives that can reach him. He could be the greatest football player who ever lived.
He could be the greatest American team sport athlete who ever lived.
I agree. Yeah. So you need to say that. I mean, he was so special. And the other thing, he was a perfectionist. There's a story I want to tell you, and I don't know if I ever told you. Bill Walsh obviously really admired Jerry Rice. Mm-hmm. And Bill and I, we would talk a lot. And one day he started talking about Jerry. And he said one of the pleasures that Bill had prior to a game, he would sneak into the locker room, and without Jerry knowing it, Bill would look at him putting on his uniform. And he said it was like a gladiator putting on the attire you'd wear for battle. And he said everything had to be perfect. The way his pants fit, the way his jersey fit into his pants. And then finally he said, and then he put a towel. He would put a towel and it would be perfectly folded. And he said, I would look at him and I know this man is ready to play. And for him, Jerry was the ideal. Right. Now, I didn't know Jerry as well as other players that I knew. And I think for various reasons, Jerry was a little solitary. Jerry, I mean, Steve Young has a big ego. Jerry has a big ego. Yeah. And I might have rubbed him the wrong way.
Sure.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, I think Ira Miller got along better with him than I did. And we were for a long time, very standoffish. When he went to the Raiders, we got to know each other a little better and chatted. But when he retired, and everybody needs to know this, when athletes retire, they become normal.
Yes.
They're no longer superstars. People really do forget about them a lot.
Yes.
And when they see the old writers, they're happy to see us because we helped make them great. We chronicled their greatness.
Yeah.
And so remember several years ago, Carmen Policy was getting into the Bay Area Sports Hall of Fame.
Of course.
And they had a cocktail hour before the whole thing started. You and I were having a drink with someone else, and Jerry walked in.
Yes.
Not only did he walk in, usually when we were younger, he would have avoided me. He came right over and tell how it was.
Well, we were kind of standing in a circle with some friends and PR people like you would before class in high school. And he just walked into the circle and poked his head in like, what are you guys talking about?
Yeah, right.
Like, hey, can I join this conference? It's like, hey, that's Jerry Rice. It was really interesting. He was so like humble and down to earth.
Absolutely down to earth and wanted to be one of us.
Absolutely. Was interested in what we were talking about. Not like one of those athletes who come in and it's like, here I am. Let's talk about me.
Yeah, let's talk about my hamstring.
Yeah, no, not like that at all. And the other thing I noticed was, I don't know how old he is, but he was in really good shape.
He is. He's a fabulous athlete.
Yeah, he looked like he could have played for the 49ers that night.
And, I praised him on something. And I remember, he stopped and he said, you praised me, Lowell. He said, that's nice. I really appreciate that.
Is that because you didn't praise him much during his career, or he just likes praise?
He probably thought I didn't praise him enough.
Yeah, right.
The other thing was, remember he got really hurt one time, Iggy?
Yes, tore his ACL.
And he wasn't playing for a long time.
That's right.
And at practice, I could see him on a far field. He would just be solitary, running back and forth and back and forth. And you knew if anybody is going to come back,
Yeah.
he would move heaven and earth to come back.
Right.
And
He was on the long road back, but it didn't matter how long it was. He would stick it through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So not only a great player, but a great competitor, and as an adult turned into just a lovely man.
Yeah. And I know we're talking about personalities, but I think it's interesting to mention with Jerry Rice. I think people forget how great he was. People say he's the greatest wide receiver of all time. Well, that's just the beginning. He's the greatest 49er of all time. He might be the greatest football player of all time. I mean, he's in the Michael Jordan class. He was as good at his job as Jordan was at his.
That's very interesting. Let me ask you something. When you say he might be the greatest 49er of all time, how does that stack up with Joe Montana?
I think if you were to compare their box scores, Jerry Rice was greater for longer.
Okay, but maybe I have a bias.
Yes.
But I have a quarterback bias.
Fair enough.
And maybe Jerry was better at what he did probably than Joe at what he did. Joe was pretty good.
Joe's the best. Yeah.
And he was the quarterback.
Yeah.
So I would say Jerry's better, but Joe's more important.
Now, that's a good segue into Joe Montana.
Okay. Right. You see, you're smart.
Hey.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I'll ask you first. Yeah. You've never met Joe.
No, I haven't.
What is your impression of him from afar?
My impression of him from afar, just from what I've seen, is that the way he presented himself as a player was similar to how Jimmy Garoppolo presents himself.
I agree.
Smiles, doesn't have a whole lot to say, not trying to be controversial. One of the guys, I get the feeling the players love Joe Montana.
Yes.
So similar to Jimmy, although Joe Montana was the greatest quarterback of all time, so I wouldn't go too far with that comparison. But that's how I see him. Simple, as opposed to Steve Young, who could talk to you nonstop for a half an hour about law or ethics or.
Yes, I want to clarify one thing.
Yeah,
I agree. Joe was simple and may still be, but that doesn't mean unintelligent.
Of course not.
So I want to make that clear. I feel in order to be the quarterback he had to be deeply intelligent.
No doubt.
I think I've talked to him on other subjects, and he's a very bright grown up.
Absolutely.
But yes, more simple than Steve. Steve, a more complex personality.
Yes.
And I would add to that, when Joe was young, he was very shy. Yes. You think of him, Joe Montana.
Right.
Ira used to say, when Joe would go on the field, he would flip a switch and he would become Joe Montana.
Yeah.
The greatest quarterback and the person who commanded everything. Away from the field, he was a little shy. And he didn't always make eye contact when I talked to him.
Interesting.
I felt sometimes he was a little wary that maybe I would louse him up, and maybe that was it. And again, he and I did not talk a lot. Ira said, again, Ira and I did all this together, and Ira was wonderful. He said Joe was not standoffish with the media, but he was with us, Ira and me. But he was actually pretty good with the media, as opposed to Kaepernick, and maybe we'll come to him later. But what I want to say is there was one incident, and I do write about it in the book. They used to practice in Redwood City.
Yeah.
This was a long time ago. And it was kind of a dump, but Iggy, it was homey. It was like a clubhouse. You know what I mean?
Yeah. 1981, real low. Yeah.
But they were a Super Bowl champion. And in those days, it's not like now. It's more like what a baseball clubhouse used to be.
Right.
You could just sit at the end of the day, in the locker room. I lived in Palo Alto, so I was in no hurry. I would sit, and one day, John Frank, who was one of their tight ends, and he later became a doctor, he had been reading a book, The Kool-Aid Acid Trip by Tom Wolfe, and he wanted to talk to me about it.
Mm-hmm.
Iggy, he had the book, and, I had read the book, and we were chatting. Here come Joe Montana and Ronnie Lott.
Wow.
And they pulled up chairs. This could never happen now, Iggy.
Yeah.
Ronnie Lott and Joe pulled up chairs, and for a minute I stopped talking, and they both said, no, please go on. And John Frank and I were talking about the book, and they were listening, and both of them asked a few questions.
Wow.
And then when it was over, Joe and Ronnie said, gee, Lowell, that was really interesting. Thanks a lot, and thanks for talking about that in our locker room. And then Joe got up, but he didn't leave. And then he talked a little about what it was like going to Notre Dame. And it
Wow.
was really the only real time. He said they used to go to a bar.
I love the story.
Do you know the story?
Tell it. I love the story.
Okay. There was a bar they all went to, the students, and it was so crowded that you had to stand, like move sideways. And Joe moved against the wall sideways to show me. And he said, what was strange, there was another bar just like it next door, but no one went to that. And they all got crowded in the one bar. And he said, Lowell, do you know why it was like that? I didn't go to Notre Dame. I didn't know. But Iggy, that could never happen now.
No, it shows that he was an intellectually curious person.
Absolutely.
Yes.
He was an intellectual. He and Ronnie wanted to know what was going on, and they were fascinated, and they didn't make the distinction so much media, player. It wasn't like that. We were all there together all the time, working together.
What were you going to say about Ronnie just now?
Okay. Now, Joe was shy.
Okay.
Ronnie.
No.
Ronnie had a domineering personality like Harbaugh.
Yep.
Now, he had more subtlety.
Yes.
More subtlety, and he was affectionate.
Yeah.
Harbaugh could be, but
yeah.
Ronnie was affectionate. He would touch you. He would, how you doing?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
But Iggy, I would like to retell the story about where he used to freelance on plays.
Oh, yes, please.
Would you tell? Can you tell it?
Well, I've just you told it to me.
Seifert, I'm not sure if I think at this point he was still the defensive coordinator.
Okay.
And Ronnie used to go over to Dwight Hicks and others and say, I may do something different from the play, right? I may do something different from the play.
I got a feeling.
That's right. He would say, I got a feeling.
Cover me. I got a feeling.
Cover me. You should tell this story. Cover me. I got a feeling. So anyway, on one play, the coaches didn't know what in the world he was doing.
Yeah.
Now, they after the game, I guess they're looking at film of what happened in the game, and one of them said to Seifert, "What the hell was Ronnie doing?
Yeah.
Do you even understand?" And you explain what happened after that.
Okay, so Ronnie said, "Yeah, Seifert said, yeah, sure, it's a problem. Our best player doesn't do what we say. We have no idea what he's doing." But the other team, when they watch film, will also have no idea what Ronnie's doing.
That's right.
It might be a play that we called, and it'll just confuse them. So as long as the other team is just as confused as we are, we're okay.
Right. They may think we called some kind of play where Ronnie's running all over the place, and that would be the next opponent watching the film.
That's priceless. Priceless.
And that really did happen because one of the coaches told me.
I have another question. You said that Joe Montana was the most confident person on the field, but off the field, he was a little shy.
Yes.
Was Bill Walsh that way as well? Did they have that in common?
Bill was not shy.
Not shy.
Bill was insecure.
Got it. Different.
Bill was overly sensitive.
Got it.
So on the field, he would stand there like this.
Yes.
And calling the plays and like that. A professor.
Yeah.
And look, Bill Walsh was a genius at that. As great as Kyle Shanahan is, and he's great, I think he's not at the Bill level yet.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, Dad.
Fair to say. And I think he'd say it too.
Yeah.
But off the field, Bill would worry about, what is so-and-so thinking about me? What is so-and-so saying about me?
Wow.
Yeah. He, toward the end of his life, he co-taught a class at Stanford. It was some economics thing or whatever. I don't know what it was. And he used to call me, Mm-hmm. So he calls me one day, and he had a quaver in his voice. And he said, "Gee, Lowell, I'm teaching that class at Stanford, but it's not going well." I said, why isn't it going well, Bill? He said, my voice isn't what it used to be. I don't know what these Stanford students think of me. So I said, look, Bill, first of all, your voice is fine. And second of all, they came to be with Bill Walsh. Whatever you're imparting to them is actually secondary to them being in your presence and just learning who you are. And he was so sweet. He said, "Do you really think so?" This is Bill Walsh asking me. I said, "I have all the confidence in the world." "Well, thank you, Lowell. You just made me feel better." And that's how Bill was. He had a lot of insecurity. Why he did, God knows.
Did the insecurity drive him to be great? I mean,
Yes. That's it. You're a very good
thank you.
journalist. Theme. Yes, it did. He was always overcoming it. And in addition, he had a depressive streak.
Ah,
Before games, he would sometimes convince himself he was going to lose.
wow.
Yes. And he told me in a way he didn't mind because it made him work better and harder and more intelligently to prove he wouldn't lose.
Got it.
And so part of his week by week method was to go into the dumps and get out.
Right. And it would take an obsessive focus on football to get out, just like Jerry Rice had.
Yes, maybe that's why he secretly observed Jerry Rice.
Theme. Okay. Let's talk about Dwight Clark. What was he really like?
Oh gosh.
I never met him.
Okay. I wish you had. Okay. Dwight Clark was one of the kindest, sweetest, friendliest, most normal, famous athlete I ever met. When I was with Dwight, and I knew him quite well, I mean, I knew him from the beginning, he acted like it was a privilege to be with me.
That's funny. That's funny.
And Lowell, it's so great to see you. And we would meet for lunch, and he was that way.
Yeah.
And when poor Dwight was dying, whatever, I forget a few years ago.
Yeah.
He invited select media. He was living in Capitola down by Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
And he invited select media to come and have lunch with him at this very nice restaurant. Matty Mayoko, Murph, Brian Murphy, me, Mark Ibanez, Mark Purdy, and a few others. And he came in, and he was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
To see this beautiful man and this beautiful athlete, it was heartbreaking. Well, he was at pains to make us feel at home. You would have thought that he was perfectly okay.
Right.
He didn't want to discuss it. He just wanted to reminisce and tell us that we had meant something to him.
And that's how he always had been.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was a guy, if I ever had a question, I could contact him.
Wow.
And he wouldn't tell me secrets that would hurt anyone, but he would answer in a forthright manner.
Right.
And then when he became, he was the general manager.
That's right.
And, if I had questions, especially about players from other teams, he would connect me. He would say to scouts, you need to talk to Lowell Cone. You can talk all off the record, but you need to tell him the truth.
Wow.
About Richard Seymour on the Raiders.
Whoa.
One of the scouts told me, that he said he's a great player, but he said, we hear over here that, now it may not be true, Iggy, but he said, what we hear is he doesn't practice during the week. And he said, as great as he is, and he's great, one of your leaders doesn't practice. That's not good for the Raiders.
No.
It's a bad example. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying he didn't practice.
Yeah.
I'm saying a scout told me he didn't practice.
Fair enough. And that's the kind of issue that maybe the Patriots could handle, but the Raiders couldn't back in 2000, whatever that was, 7.
Whatever that was.
Yeah.
And it was Dwight. Dwight said, you need this? And this scout, who probably didn't want to talk to me, came out, and we sat alone in front of the building.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wish I had that kind of access.
It doesn't exist anymore.
It does not exist anymore. Interesting. He's an old school guy.
Old school guy. Sense of humor. And again, you know what? When I would see Dwight when we were older, we would always hug.
That's interesting.
Now, I wouldn't presume to hug Joe Montana or Jerry Rice, although Steve and I hug.
Yeah.
It's a manly thing to do. It's a masculine thing to do.
Of course.
But Dwight Clark, he was the kind of guy. I remember once at Candlestick, I was going to a game, and I parked where you park, and he was tailgating with someone. He ran over to me, leaving these people, and he came over and gave me a big hug.
That's amazing.
That's who Dwight Clark was.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously wasn't alive. I was born in 1988, but when I think of him, it's interesting that he was kind of anonymous in college. He didn't even play much on the Clemson football
He caught
team.
11 passes.
Yeah. So he was nobody in college. He probably wasn't the big man on campus or famous. Then he goes to the NFL and is a legend, an all-time legend for like one of the most important franchises ever. What a life.
You know, he where did he play?
Clemson, I think. Am I
Clemson.
wrong?
Yeah, and what happened was Bill Walsh had flown down there to see the quarterback. Do you remember? I forget names.
No. Whoever
anyway,
the guy was.
Dwight was rooming with the quarterback, and Bill went down to see the quarterback.
Yeah.
So the phone is ringing in their apartment, and Dwight has his golf clubs.
Yeah.
He's going to go out to play golf, and he almost didn't answer the phone. He finally said, "What the heck?"
That was fate calling.
It was fate.
It's fate calling.
He answers the phone, and he says, "Hi, this is Bill Walsh." And at first, Dwight thought he was kidding.
Right.
And he says, is so-and-so the quarterback there? And he says he isn't. And he says to Dwight, "Oh, you were a wide receiver, right?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Look, the quarterback, I need someone to catch his passes because I'm going to watch him later today." So he says, "Would you come?" So Dwight goes, so the quarterback has someone to catch passes. Mm-hmm. Well, Bill's looking at them. He's more interested in Dwight.
Wow.
He's more interested in Dwight than the quarterback. So, because he's big, he's strong, and he ran disciplined routes.
Yes.
Routes. Anyway, so afterward, he's talking to Dwight, and he says, "Do you have any film?" Yeah. He said, "There's barely any film on me." He said, "I think I only caught 11 passes." Bill says, "Did you ever catch 2 in one game?" He says, "Yeah, no, it's a game. I caught 2 passes." He said, "Let me see that." Bill saw it, and he drafted him.
Wow.
That's the story of Dwight Clark.
That's a great story. Yeah. And then he was like King Arthur. He was like nobody, and he pulled the stone out, the sword out of the stone.
Yes. Yeah. That's the story of Dwight Clark.
All right. Well, I got a couple more names. Let's start with George Seifert. What was he like?
Okay. Very interesting man. I would say George Seifert has no sense of humor.
The most serious person of all time.
Oh, he is the most serious person I've ever met. Now, maybe if he has something to drink, he's different. But I never heard him crack a joke. Uh-huh. When I cracked a joke, it was like, and so I don't think he had any sense of humor. Uh-huh. Having said that, he was thoroughly decent. He was brilliant. He was a brilliant defensive coordinator, and he won 2 Super Bowls as a head coach. So a heck of a head coach.
Yes. And a few as a coordinator.
He was really special. One of the coaches on those staffs, one of the defensive coaches, when he was defensive coordinator, told me that he was always making up plays. And, in order to install, they call it, the verb is install a play, you have to practice it. Well, Sunday morning, he was still making up plays.
Right.
And there was no way you could practice because the game was going to be up in 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so the defensive coaches would find places to hide 2 hours before the game or 3, because he would want to come and say, "We have to run this play." Right. And then they would have to say, "How can we run the play? We haven't installed it with the players." And they didn't want to have that. And for George to get angry, so they'd hide in the broom closet or other places. So the morning of the game, he couldn't buttonhole them and put in plays they had never practiced.
I see. So his assistants were avoiding him because they were afraid that he'd tell them, "Hey, we're going to call this play. Tell your players."
Exactly. Ooh. And they couldn't do it. That's so funny. They would hide from him. Now, they all loved him.
Yes.
He's the most thoroughgoing, decent man. And I'll tell you something else. Ira Miller is closer to George than I am. And Ira has gone up to his house. I think it's in Bodega Bay or something like that. Ira told me that Seifert has no football memorabilia.
Really?
None. That you walk into George's house, and it's just a regular house with no trophies, no photos, no nothing. And Ira said when he left football, he really left football.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
We know a few coaches like that.
Fred Von Appen is like that.
Yeah. He left and went to Montana and doesn't even have a television. He reads books.
He reads books all the time. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. Some people, I feel like what I've experienced with the NFL is it's an addiction. And these people get their fixes once a week. And some people can't ever let it go. Some people kick the habit and never look back.
I agree.
Yep.
Yes. And I would say, I know Joe Montana has kicked the habit and doesn't look back. Eddie
Steve has not.
DeBartolo. Eddie DeBartolo.
Yep, Steve has not.
No, Steve still has a job with it.
That's right.
And he
Yep.
goes on the radio and all of that.
Yes.
Yeah, he's different.
Okay. All right, last guy. Jim Harbaugh. And now I know Jim too, so we can both talk about him, but I'd love to hear.
Why don't you go first? Because I've been shooting off my mouth.
Okay, what was Jim Harbaugh like? He's not as big of a jerk as he wants you to think he is.
Totally agree.
His whole thing, it's like you used to talk about how when you were a teacher, you used to stare at every student one by one to make a subject-object relationship. I'm the subject here. He would do the same thing in press conferences with new journalists. If they asked a question that he felt was a little too casual or a little too close to something that he thought was sensitive, he would pretty much shout you down and see if you had the courage to come back the next time. What kind of question is that? What are you asking? He was very much into intimidation and who is the manliest man in the room right now. And once you played that game with him, he would respect you. I like that about him.
And like you. Like you.
Like, yeah, he wanted you to match his horsepower or see if you could.
I would totally agree with that and say, in addition, he saw, because we dealt with him as media, he saw press conferences as competition.
He saw the whole world as competition.
Yes, everything was competition.
Yes.
And for him, if you sat there quietly and or timidly, you lost.
Right, and you're just pretending to be weaker than you are, because anyone could ask a tough question at any time. And it's like you're trying to lull him to sleep with your, humbleness. But he didn't trust that.
No, absolutely not. And he didn't trust praise.
No, absolutely not.
But
he would rather have a real tough question than a softball. He would like the high heat more than the softball question.
Yes, and you and I would ask direct, sometimes penetrating, hard questions. He loved it.
Right, because at least we were authentic with where we were coming from.
Yes,
he loved it. Pretending to be his friend. We weren't pretending to be on his side. No, this is the big leagues. We're tough, you're tough. Let's go.
And, also, if you knew football, if you knew the vocabulary and the grammar of football, do you remember that Why Stick Lookie?
Yes.
And Iggy, that's when he could you tell that story? And that's when he began to like you.
Yes. It was 2012. I think it was 2012. I think they had gone to Seattle. It was against Seattle. And Vernon Davis was the best player on the team back then, or on the offense, had 0 catches in the game. 0. Which is pretty scandalous. They lost. And so my question was, instead of saying, Jim, how come you couldn't get the ball to your tight end in the game? Which he would have hated that question.
Hated the question.
And it would have been a fight. Like, what do you mean I didn't get the – like, how would you have done it, Grant? So I wanted to show him that I'd done my homework. So I said, Jim, since the days that you were at Stanford, the days that you were at San Diego, you've specialized in getting the ball to your tight ends. I mean, you've been calling plays like why stick and why stick lookie and the why stick nod forever. How come you didn't call that play against the Seahawks to get Vernon Davis 1 catch? And he looked at me and he said, with his eyes open, he said, why stick, huh? Well, we did call the stick, didn't call the nod, but we did call the stick. But good question. And at least we're speaking the same language now. And we always got along after that.
Well, not only that, he sought you out in the locker room and he tapped you on the shoulder in front of all the players.
That was a little bit later. That was week 3 of 2013. They were playing the Colts. It was a few days after Aldon Smith had cracked up his car. Everyone in the world thought the Niners would beat the Colts. It was at home. Andrew Luck, I predicted the Colts would win. Andrew Luck came in and beat the 49ers. It was a big deal. And a couple days later in the locker room, Harbaugh walks in with his mouth open. You know how he does. This guy is breathing through his mouth. And he comes over and puts his arm around me, taps me on the shoulder, says, how you doing, Grant?
Yeah.
In front of every writer, every player. He had never actually used my name before.
And what that means is he's telling the players he's okay by me.
He's okay.
And I think one of the reasons he did it is because prior to that, he might have told them you weren't okay by him.
Yep. I think that's probably right. Yes.
So he was saying, we're changing the play here.
Yes.
I'm calling an audible.
Yeah.
And now Grant's okay.
Yeah, that's happened. That happened. So look, I've heard from former players of Harbaugh that he was tough to play for. And I can imagine not wanting to play for Harbaugh and not wanting my kids to play for him either. But covering him as a journalist was a thrill, and I miss it.
It was a thrill. And I want to say, not to promote my book again, he wrote the afterword for
That's
the
right.
He
And it's a heck of an afterword.
Iggy, last thing. Please tell everybody what Why Stick is.
Why stick? Why stick is a simple route where the tight end runs about 7 yards upfield, turns around. That's it. Why stick? He sticks in one spot, runs upfield, 7 yards, turns around quick. That's a 7-yard catch. If it's like getting your Michael Jordan a layup. You know, he's 0 for 5 from 3. Get him a layup. That's a layup. That's the football equivalent of a layup to a tight end, the why stick.
What's why stick looky?
Why stick looky is a variation where if the defense knows it's coming and they're overplaying the tight end, you can throw a pass to a wide receiver running a slant on the backside. You look over there. If the defense over-rotates, and the nod is a great call in the red zone. So it's like the changeup. If the stick is the fastball, the nod is the changeup. So you're in the red zone, maybe at the 15-yard line, and the tight end runs 7 yards, makes a move like he's gonna stop and do the stick, and then keeps going straight. And it's a great way to get the touchdown from 15 yards out. Niners do it with George Kittle.
I love it. Well, yeah. I think we did it. This was a lot of fun.
This was great. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and please buy the book, Gloves Off. It's the best book you will ever read. And I want to say it's the best thing my dad's ever done. He's a great columnist, but it's been weird reading him in newspapers my whole life because he doesn't get to curse in newspapers. It's like the PG version of my dad. And as someone who grew up around him, he's not a PG kind of guy. He's quite rated R, and this is a rated R book, and it is the first accurate representation of my dad's voice. It's the best thing he's ever done. I highly recommend it.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Talk to you guys soon.